Then I'll get started. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. We hope you're well and that you're healthy and hanging in. Let's crack on with today's webinar. So I'm Gary Hodgson, and I'm delighted to be introducing today's I Coach Kids Shares live webinar, and which is our 23rd issue, which is incredible. Behind the scenes, we have Barnaby Sargent-Megix, who without this wouldn't happen. So thanks, Barney. And also with me, I have our very own Sergio Larabertial. Hi, Sergio.
Hi, Gary. Thank you. And thanks, everybody. Thank you for making the time to join us today. We're going to explore the topic of parents in sport with two fantastic guests, Dr. Nikki Clark and Professor Camilla Knight. But before we meet them, back to Gary for some housekeeping.
Yeah, thanks, Sergio. So just another reminder that to keep your camera and microphone off while you're with us today and submit all the questions that you have via the chat function. In the meantime, if you don't already, why not subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch well over 200 videos of I Coach Kids content, and sign up to one of our free learning courses via our website, which is currently icoachkids.eu, or follow us on our social media, which is at iCoachKidsWorld on all platforms. So, Sergio, over to you to get the panel started.
Thank you. So let me first explain how things are going to run today. Okay, first we will introduce our guests and hear them present their work. And following their presentation, we're going to start asking some questions of the speakers. And finally, we will turn over to the audience for your questions. So please, throughout the webinar, keep dropping your questions into the chat box so we can ask them later on. Now, what about parents in sport? Okay, so throughout a child or an athlete's sporting journey, they will engage with a variety of individuals, such as coaches, teammates, sports scientists, you name it. However, while other individuals might change as they progress to the ranks of sport, there is one person or two who remains a constant part of their life, which is their parents or guardians. And it is important to remember that parents are not the enemy. Okay, parents are usually responsible for introducing children to sport, encouraging their participation, supporting them through the ups and downs, as well as, of course, funding participation, transporting them to training and competitions, and ensuring they have all the equipment they need and all the gear to be able to do their sport. As children progress through sport as well, the emotional support and understanding of parents continues to be important, not least because parents know their children better than anybody else. By fulfilling such roles, parents help to enhance children's enjoyment of sport, encourage their long-term involvement, and ensure children have a chance to gain the range of psychological, social, and physical benefits associated with sport participation. The importance of parents within the lives of young athletes cannot be underestimated. Speakers today will describe and explain the role of parents in supporting children's psychosocial development and experiences in sport, and discuss strategies for developing effective relationships between coaches, parents, and young athletes. To introduce our guest, I'm going to hand over back to Gary. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Sergio. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our first speaker today, Dr. Nicola Clark of Leeds Beckett University. So Nicola is a senior lecturer in sports coaching at Leeds Beckett University over here in the United Kingdom. Her research and teaching interests centre around understanding how the social context influences experiences and relationships in sport, with a focus on coaches, parents, and young athletes. She's delivered coach and parent psychology education workshops within elite youth football and is a youth korfball coach. Welcome, Nikki.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Serge.
I will stop sharing now, Nikki, and if you'd like to share your presentation, that would be amazing.
We good?
Marvellous.
Super. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome along. So I'm going to talk a little bit more from the perspective of how, as coaches, we can really try and work as effectively with parents as possible. So as we know, parents are a really foundational part of youth sport. And I'll just say a caveat before we go any further. Both Camilla and I, when we're talking about parents, we might also include anyone really with a caring responsibility for a child who's involved in the youth sport clubs and organisations that we're part of. So that might also be a grandparent or a carer. So consider that term very broadly. But they are certainly an important part of our role. And finding ways to build relationships with parents and families might be a part of your role that you really relish and that as a coach you believe is important, or is one that causes you a little bit of stress and is one that perhaps you wish you didn't really have to manage. It might also be in your coaching context that you have lots of expectations for you to spend time and resources to work with parents, or it might be that actually it's something that you find it difficult to prioritize depending on the type of organization that you're working in. And I want to start by saying that any of those experiences along that spectrum are completely valid. And regardless of where you sit on those continuums, I'm hopefully going to share with you some ideas for how you can reflect on your current engagement with the parents that you work with. So if you have a pen and paper there, there's a small task just to consider to start with that will hopefully help you to then reflect upon your current engagement. So just think about what would be one thing that you would like to achieve as a coach in relation to working with the parents of the children that you are involved in coaching. And so it's worth noting that when we think about parents in sport, quite often we hear examples of the extremes, maybe parents who are being very aggressive in their behaviours and are not necessarily helping the coaching process, through to parents of protégés who everyone wants to know what it is that they've done for their child to be so successful at such an early age. And in reality, there's a lot of different types of coach-parent relationships. So see what you might resonate with on this slide here. So there has been some work around identifying the different sort of parent types that we might encounter as coaches. And although these can sometimes be a little bit of a stereotype, it might be something that you have seen or experienced in your coaching. And broadly, the parent types often kind of fall into good parents and problem parents. And that's where the typology can sometimes be a little bit unhelpful. However, it may be something that you recognize from your experience. And in amongst the different parents that we work with, there is a huge variety, not just positive and negative or good and problem parents. There's a huge variety of coach relationships that we might encounter. Broadly speaking, that might be that as a coach, we can develop a collaborative relationship with parents in sport, where we might have shared goals and a mutual respect for each other's expertise. Alternatively, we can have a type of relationship that is more focused on working primarily with the children that we coach and our young athletes, where the parent is perhaps more in the background. They're a little more distant. They're maybe kept at arm's length to a certain extent, and the coach-athlete relationship is the primary area of interest. And thirdly, there has been research suggesting that there is a contractual type of coach-parent relationship as well, where the parents are our customers, and as a consequence, as a coach, we may feel obliged to help to meet parents' needs because of the kind of service provider role that we are fulfilling as a coach. So I hope in this slide you can see that there is a real variety of the way that we might interact with parents, and hopefully this helps to emphasize the point around trying not to see parents as homogenous. And often it's easy to say the parents are doing this, all parents are behaving like this, but there's a real real variety in the types of relationships that we may have already and that we might seek to develop. So think about these coach-parent relationships. Are there ones here that jump out to you as things that you identify with, or ones that you might want to try to build with the appropriate time and resources? These different relationships will also vary in terms of the expectations that both coaches and parents have of each other. Our different views on expertise and who perhaps has control or responsibility for making decisions around training, deciding what's best for the development of our children in sport. We may have different types of communication in terms of how frequent that communication is, how informal or formal, how open and honest we feel that we can be with coach parents. They'll also vary in terms of the amount of trust that we may have when working with parents, and equally parents working with us as coaches. And there's some different ways of thinking about trust, which has been identified in some of the research, is that there may be different levels of technical trust in terms of parents trusting coaches with our knowledge of our sport and how to develop athletes. And there may also be interpersonal trust, which is more focused on understanding how, as coaches, we're trusted to build positive relationships with the children and the families of the children that we coach. And then all of the other four, I guess, really underpin how we might deal with any conflict within interactions we have with parents. So across many different sporting contexts from different countries, there has been an indication that on the whole, coaches report that working with parents is generally positive, and that there can be a huge range of benefits that Camilla is also going to talk about shortly, that we can gain from having these relationships. However, even in really positive parent relationships, it can be expected that at some point through a child's journey in sport, we may find some conflicts. So how we manage and resolve those will differ depending on the type of relationship that we have with that parent. So thinking about our goal for what we'd like to do or what we'd like to achieve with working with parents, this model, I think, is really useful for helping us reflect on the decisions that we might make. So this is adapted from Abraham's coach decision-making model, might be familiar to some of you. And we're going to have a look at that today in terms of what it might mean for how we can try and enhance the relationships that we have with the parents that we work with. So firstly, it's worth considering who are the parents of the children that you coach. Firstly, does your goal that you wrote down relate to all of the parents, most of them, or maybe is it some parents that actually there's something there you would like to change or improve? And whether or not it is all or some of those parents, do you know those parents well enough to judge how receptive they might be to the goal that you want to change? And do you think that parents might respond differently to your intended goal? So there are many things that might be different amongst parents that, if we understood, might help us to have more positive, mutually beneficial interactions. What can parents do to support children in youth sport? So it's important that we have a clear idea about how we think parents can benefit children in sport. And this may in particular be a reflection of our own beliefs developed from our own experiences of working with parents over time, maybe our own parenting, or even how we were parented ourselves. And thirdly, it's worth reflecting on the ways that we can try and work effectively with parents too. So looking at your goal, what is maybe stopping this from being achieved? Or if you have tried it before, did it work? Did it not work, and why? What resources do you have that might help you to be able to achieve your goal? And all these things work together. Around the outside, the model recognises that when we're working with a parent in sport, it's not in a social vacuum, it is within a particular club or organisational context. So understanding how the environment in which we work maybe enables certain types of interactions with parents or maybe constrains it is really important, as is reflecting on our own beliefs, values and behaviours that we hold as coaches in relation to working with parents. So if you look at your goal, is it framed more positively? Are there things that you want parents to do more? Or is it maybe framed negatively? There's things that you would like parents to do less of or to even stop doing. Is it a goal that's more directed around helping you as a coach? Or is it more directed around the parent helping the child that you coach? All of these things might be influenced by our own beliefs about what parents can do and why. And finally, to what extent have you as a coach in the past planned time to focus on your interaction with parents and reviewed how it is going? Maybe making some time to consider what we want to achieve with working with parents and how we can maybe do it differently can be useful. So to unpick these in a little bit more detail, understanding our who. So who are the parents that we work with? Parents are going to vary based on a number of things, and I've put some in the box on the slide here. But maybe the really key one there is expectations. Understanding what expectations a parent has before they come into your sporting context, and maybe how those change over time. So potentially thinking about what questions do you ask parents to kind of understand what their expectations are for their child, what their expectations are of you as a coach, can help you to understand your parents a little better. Equally, is there a point where you review that? Do you have opportunities year on year, maybe mid-season, where you can have an open and honest conversation with parents about what their expectations are and how they might have changed? If we understand the needs of parents, potentially we might be able to adapt our communication and adapt our interactions to try and meet those needs for the benefit of everybody. So when we think about what parents can do to support children in youth sport, as I said, this might be something that is based on your personal experiences. And there are lots of ways that we know from research that parents can help children in youth sport. They are crucial potentially to enhancing children's experiences and making it a really positive environment and helping children to stay in sport and have a lifelong love for sport as long as possible. There are also behaviours that parents can do to really try and foster children's psychosocial development, both in the moment and really working on some of those competencies that they can apply into other areas of their lives as well. Parents are important in helping children make it through really difficult transition points and helping them to progress through their career if that's what they wish to do so. And as Sergio said right at the beginning, parents have this really special knowledge and expertise that they know their child best, and being able to share not just how that child is responding in a sport environment, but what else is going on in their lives, and other kind of information about that child may be helpful for us to improve what we're doing as coaches as well. So I know Camilla's going to talk about more specific things that parents can do to bring about positive outcomes, but I think it's worth us understanding as coaches what it is that we would like parents to do so we can help to think about our own engagement. And finally, the how. So with this in mind, if we know what type of relationship we want to build, and we think we understand our parents and we know what we'd like them to do, what strategies can work to help enhance that engagement with parents? So I'm going to focus on two areas both communication and trust, as I think these are foundational to being able to understand each other's expectations and manage and resolve conflicts should and if they arise. So thinking about enhancing communication, we need to think about the frequency of how often we are making opportunities to both share information with parents and have an opportunity for discussion in more of a two-way dialogue as well. And I think it's easy to say, well, we just need to talk to parents more often. But the caveat there is that, you know, what is realistic? So depending on the coaching context in which you're working, you may have more or less time and resources to be able to talk more frequently with parents. Or there might be ways that you have to be a little bit more selective on how you do that so that you're making the most of your time and resources too. Planning the content of your communication is really key as well. Perhaps there are obvious ways that we communicate with parents in terms of logistics and arrangements for competitions and things like that. But how are we sharing feedback with parents about how their child is doing? How are we asking for parents to share with us how they think their child is finding being in that sport environment? Are we asking parents how they're finding being in the sporting environment? As parents certainly can also experience transitions and different journeys as they support their child through sport. And finally, thinking about the processes of how we enhance that communication is important too. So are we going to focus on a strategy that involves informal communication? So some examples from youth tennis include having parent laps where the coach makes the opportunity to go round the courts to make sure every parent has been spoken to in an informal way, or in football, being able to be accessible either at the beginning of the session for a bit, just have some general catch-up chats, or perhaps at the end. Or is it more formal types of communication where perhaps you're organising meetings, thinking about who's in those meetings and why we're holding them? So again, in elite youth football, there's an expectation that there's a number of parent and coach meetings held throughout a season. Thinking about how those meetings can play out can be a useful idea. Two other pieces of advice from research in terms of enhancing communication is to think about individualizing your approach where possible. So if we know that parents are not homogenous and have different needs, and maybe that you might have slightly different types of relationships with parents, perhaps you need to think about communicating slightly differently where we can. And also setting boundaries with the number of different types of communication there is available at the moment. So social media, text messaging, emails, etc. It can become very overwhelming if, as a coach, we are so open that those kind of requests and long emails, etc., are kind of reaching us all the time, and that may be difficult to manage too. So I think it's okay to have some clear boundaries with ways that you will communicate with parents and that parents can communicate with you as a coach as well. And building trust, I think, is also key. So as I said before, there's some evidence that there's different types of trust that as a coach we can try and build with parents and families. Technical trust being that to what extent parents believe in our expertise to develop children in our sport appropriately. And so ways in some sports that coaches have found to build that technical trust include having an open session where there is perhaps a training session happening that you are on the sideline as a coach with the parents for them to watch, where they can ask questions about what they're seeing, that if there is a particular pedagogical strategy that they're not familiar with, they can ask questions, or if they're just unsure about anything, you're there on the sideline to basically have a Q&A, but alongside the session as it's occurring. And equally, this is particularly helpful. There's some examples from rugby union where the sport was trying to use more of a problem-based learning approach. So that can look quite messy from the sideline as a coach. And we know that the learning is happening, but it may be unfamiliar to parents. So having a particular session that explained the rationale behind those decisions enabled the rugby coaches to get more buy-ins from the parents about what were happening on the pitch. And equally, there's been research that's recommended having more formal kind of pre-season meetings to set those boundaries, explain philosophies, talk about what the goals are for the season. And I think that's part of the communication approach that can work best, is that there are some formal opportunities for sharing our approaches and for answering questions, with some more informal ones to kind of check in on how people are doing throughout a year. And interpersonal trust, I've put there, kind of seeing parents as an asset is probably the best starting point for how you can try and get that buy-in from parents to trust us at an interpersonal level. And therefore trying to reflect on our own coaching behaviours and the extent to which we are behaving in ways that help parents to see that we value their knowledge and expertise. So back to our decision-making model and your goal. Have a look at it again. I hope what I've talked about for the last few minutes have given you some things to think about in terms of understanding your parents, what they can do and how you might be able to work with them. But importantly, remembering that it will be different depending on the context in terms of the resources that you have to be able to work with parents. It's very different in an individual sport to a team sport, for example. And also that it's important to reflect on our own beliefs that we have in relation to working with parents and how we may be able to adapt to try and build that trust and find ways of effective communication that hopefully leads to more positive outcomes for everybody. Thank you very much for listening. I think I'm handing over to Camilla now, who I know is going to talk a lot more about some of these real benefits that hopefully effective coach-parent relationships can help to facilitate even more.
Thanks for that, Nikki. That was such excellent insight and really really useful looking at that from a who, what, how perspective, just to kind of really capture the complexities that are involved in getting in understanding parents and also helping them be part of the process. So thank you so much for that insight. I'm now going to introduce our second presenter, who is Professor Camilla Knight from Swansea University. So Camilla is a professor of sports psychology and youth sport at Swansea University in the UK. She's also the youth sport lead for the Welsh Institute of Performance Science and a member of the Welsh Safeguarding in Sport Safety Group. Camilla's research interests are concerned with understanding and enhancing the psychosocial experiences of children in sport, with a particular focus on the influence of parents. Camilla's also the co-author of Parenting in Youth Sport from Research to Practice, and also co-editor of Sports Psychology for Youth Athletes. She's published over 25 book chapters on topics related to parental involvement in sport, as well as 50 peer-reviewed journal articles, and consults widely with a range of national and international sports organisations on parental involvement and youth sport participation more broadly. Camilla, welcome to iCoach Kids Shares.
Thank you for inviting me along. I'm looking forward to having a chance to share some information. So I'll just get my screen up here. And do I need to do a little flip, or are we all good?
No, that's perfect.
Fantastic, great. Well, thank you all for inviting me, and thank you for joining us. And particular thanks to Nikki for setting up my presentation, particularly around the who are we working with. So whilst Nikki approached her topic from a coach perspective, I'm really going to focus on the parent's perspective. And particularly, I just want to talk a little bit around some of the complexity of parenting children involved in sport. And I say this often when I start presentations. I'm very biased in my representation towards parents, and that came sort of from conversations early on in my research when I talked to my own mum, and she said, it's tough being a parent and everyone's always telling you you're doing it all wrong. Don't come out and do research that just tells parents they're doing it wrong. And having joined the parenting journey myself, and I know Nikki has as well in the last couple of years, I'm even more adamant that we don't need to be telling parents what they're doing wrong. There's enough of that. And so I want to kind of, present some of this from a parent's perspective and really try and highlight, why understanding the complexity allows you to then work maybe in a more positive or more effective manner with parents. So a few years ago, there was a video clip that went viral from a football match in Wales. I'm not going to play the clip, although it might start in a minute on its own. But in this clip, what you saw was that the young lad, the goalkeeper here, as the ball was coming towards him, he gets pushed to the ground by his dad. And the result of that was that it went all over Twitter, and it was proposed that this was the best dad or the worst dad, the ultimate pushy parent, and really that, this was a representation of everything that was wrong with youth sport. And I must have got sent it, and I'm sure Nikki did actually. Anyone who works in youth sport will have been sent this clip hundreds of times within the first, hour when it came on. But I decided to look into it a little bit more, or I was interested. So I thought I'd read a bit about it. And so when it was represented on the BBC, granted, I didn't read every news outlet, so, there may be bias here, but, as the BBC represented it, first they started to talk a little bit about what the parents said, and the parents, explanation makes perfect sense. He went over to talk to his son because he was a bit bored in goal. He didn't seem to be doing all that much, but then he was chatting to him. So as a parent, he's feeling a bit bad because he's distracted. His son, the ball's coming. He tries to give him a bit of a gentle encouragement to get back into the middle of the goal. He pushed him, he fell over. So that was the parents' explanation. We also have, the explanation of the coaches and the rest of the team. We're bent over laughing. We didn't even see the ball go in the net. We thought this was a funny situation, not out the coaching manual, but perfect timing. So we've got what's going on from a coaching or a club perspective. Oh, and importantly, the lads, the boy involved seemed to think it was okay. He was happy enough about it. However, because this got reported so widely on the media, because it got attracted so much attention and everyone was talking about how terrible it was, the video got sent to the FAW, and there's a code of conduct for parents, and this is against the code of conduct because the parents behaved inappropriately, and so consequently they had to investigate. And now my question is, from an outsider's perspective, looking in on this, we can see the video, we can see the clip as it's shared online, but do we really know what's going on? Until we fully understand everyone's perspectives, the parents, the child's, the coaches, do we know what's going on? And so my question to you as coaches or to researchers working within this space is, do we assume a lot about parental involvement in sport? And do we assume that we know more than we really do simply by looking at, particularly at competitions, the behaviours of parents? So why do I suggest that we might be making some assumptions here? Well, firstly, we know that, as Nikki articulated very nicely, young athletes, children, their experiences within sport, what they learn from sport, what they gain through their participation is largely influenced by the environment that they're in. It's not dictated by what a parent does or a coach does separately or what peers do. It's influenced by all of those different aspects interacting together. However, what parents do isn't simply a tick box of do these things and avoid these things. From a coach's perspective, I can dictate looking at you that these are things you should do and these are things you shouldn't. Actually, what a parent does is influenced by a whole range of factors as well. So what a child experiences is influenced by numerous factors, and a parent is one of those. But what a parent does and how a parent impacts on their child is influenced by numerous factors. So what is happening for parents? Well, lots. Lots, and especially when children are young, I'm going to say a lot of this is happening with not much sleep underpinning it as well. But maybe that's my own personal experience. But parenting is tough. Lots of coaches will be parents, and I'm sure as a parent or as a coach without kids, I'm sure you can appreciate that parenting is challenging. Parenting happens in an environment where we have very clear views on this is appropriate or this is inappropriate. Usually, as Nikki mentioned, based on our own beliefs around what a parent should or shouldn't do, usually based on how we were raised. My gut feel, and I think, I don't know if we have the evidence for it because it would be really hard to get it, but most parents want to do the right thing by their children. I don't think there's many parents who are intentionally going out into a sporting environment and thinking, I'm going to make this as awful an experience as I can for my child. So when coaches adopt a perspective that parents are doing things wrong, it often, at least within social media, gets communicated in a manner as if to imply that parents should just know better and that they're purposely doing things wrong. But anyone who knows a parent will know that they're trying to do things, with the best intention for their child. And so when we start to consider parenting behaviors, when we start to criticize or appraise them, simply based on observing what parents are doing, it's often with a limited understanding of what the intention of parenting behaviors were. What is it that the parent was trying to do through those actions? And definitely a lack of cultural appreciation. How parents parent, the impact of parenting behaviors, the purpose of parenting, and the goals of socializing your child vary depending on different cultures. And we definitely lack research in that area. And we will be influenced by our own experiences. And so when we've got parents, when we're trying to work with parents within youth sports settings, you've got to understand that they are under considerable amounts of pressure, that there's a lot of things that are happening for them, which they're trying to manage and cope with. So if you'll indulge me for just a moment, I'll try and bring a few of those ideas to life, all within tennis examples. Anyone who knows my research knows it tends to sit in that area because that's an area that I grew up with and am very familiar with. But firstly, we've talked about that idea of parenting being right and wrong, and this idea that most parents are probably trying to get it right. Anyone who does follow tennis will know that Andre Agassi had a very tough relationship with his father, and was raised in an environment where being successful in tennis was extremely important. When you look at the two of them, so this is Mike Agassi, his father, talking about his behaviors and reflecting on his behaviors in his own autobiography. And similarly, Andre Agassi reflecting on his father's behaviors in his autobiography. It becomes clear that even in a situation which really wasn't something that we would recommend as being positive to lead to, beneficial outcomes, and definitely didn't necessarily within Andre's case lead to positive outcomes, you can see that there's a recognition that it was underpinned by love, that there was a desire in the parenting to try and help Andre succeed. And yes, it didn't go in the way that we wanted, but understanding that emotional bond, understanding that natural desire of a parent, and that consequently the impact that might have on behaviors, is one of the places I would say you've got to start as a coach when thinking about parents. We also know that parents see things that we don't. So whether you're a coach or a sports psychology practitioner, we aren't there with the players all of the way through. So this is Rafael Nadal's mum talking in an interview about the experience of watching Nadal play. She talks about how emotional it is. She talks about how she gets frustrated when people make comments because she understands the stress, the injuries he's been through, how hard he's working, and nobody else sees them. So as a parent, there's an emotional experience that comes from those shared experiences, which coaches and people on the outside don't necessarily see. And then we've also got this judgment of society. Now, this is a case that happened right back when I was doing my undergrad dissertation, my first research around parenting. And in this very tragic case, the father, to cope with the stress that he was experiencing when his children were competing in tennis, was drugging his opponents through putting things in their water bottles. One of those opponents was an adult and drove home and tragically crashed their car and died. And he, the father ended up in jail for manslaughter for 10 years. Now, that's obviously a very extreme case, one of those extreme cases that Nikki talks about, but it points a little bit towards how some of the stresses and the pressures that are placed on parents both within and outside of sport might start to impact on and influence what parents are doing. And so why have I shared that with you? Because what I'm trying to articulate is that whilst parents might have the very best intentions, and whilst parents might be going out in the hope of really developing positive experiences for their children, the actions of parents are not solely within their control. We cannot imply that parents are not influenced by other factors. And there's lots of different research that has started to articulate the influence that the competitive environment have, that our own beliefs and our own expectations and our knowledge, a number of those things that Nikki talked about, might have on our involvement. So when Nikki talked about, as a coach, the importance of knowing who your parents are, these are the aspects that I think are really important to know. Not only what are they hoping for, what are their goals for their child, but what environments are they coming from and how are those environments influencing them? If we unpack that a little more, we know that there's a big perception, for instance, among parents of what it is to be a good sport parent, an expectation that as a parent you might provide feedback, an expectation that you should engage in some degree of evaluation of a performance. And the environment that parents find themselves in, the culture, the different sports that their children are participating in, will influence what parents do. And so when we think of things, even things that are often articulated as great messages around parents, people love this one. It went around Twitter for years, it feels like, this idea that, whether your child wins or loses isn't an indication of you as a parent. However, we're going to hammer you as a parent if your child's not coachable, respectable, a great teammate, mentally tough, resilient, or trying their best. These are not innocent messages. These are messages within an environment which reinforce to parents that we are judging what you do and that what you are producing in terms of how your son or your daughter behaves in that environment is directly down to you. And so you better get it right, because otherwise, you've done something wrong as a parent. So thinking about the culture and the environment we're creating and how that influences parents is really, really important. But also understanding what parents can and can't do is key. And this again talks to that, who are you working with? Not all parents are in dual parent families. You've got single parents with multiple children that they're trying to transport to different settings, different financial structure, backgrounds, different knowledges, different expectations, different personal experiences of sport. And all of those, this picture here is a picture from a study we did where the children told us what they wanted from their parents, and then we asked the parents if they could do it. And the parents articulated all these different factors which would prevent them being able to do what children wanted. And so as a coach, understanding what is it that's limiting parents and what is it that's impacting on their involvement is really, really key to developing positive relationships with them. And ultimately, why is that so important? That's all important because if we want parents to be able to help children achieve their sporting potential, develop positive psychosocial outcomes, and have positive experiences, then you as a coach play an important role in recognizing the pressures that parents are under, the demands they're being placed on, and you play an important role in creating a culture in which parents feel or are able to do what they want. So specifically, as a coach, what you need to first do is take some time to appreciate what are the demands that parents are experiencing, and is there anything that you can do to minimize some of those demands? The next thing you might want to consider, and this is adding on to what Nikki already talked about, is how can you help prepare parents for what's to come? One of the things I hear consistently from parents is, if I'd known the cost, if I'd known the time, I might have rethought how far down the journey we went. I raise that with coaches, and coaches go, yeah, but if we tell them in advance, well, then we'll lose them and they won't stay involved. But actually, wouldn't we rather have parents who knew what was to come and knew what was expected of them and what they were preparing for, than kind of tricking them into keeping their children involved? So as a coach, you can help parents anticipate that. You can help them to anticipate the experiences that they may have in competitions. Give parents some guidance around the strategies that may help them to cope with the emotions or the situations that they're encountering. But more importantly, you can really work with parents by creating what I like to term parent positive environments. So Nikki, these are very similar ideas to what she suggested. She suggested them from what a coach can do, and I'm reiterating them in saying that parents ask for these things too. You know, if you create an environment in which parents are seen as an asset, in which parents are welcomed and valued and respected, then it's going to be much easier for you as a coach to work with those parents and to see some positive outcomes. And there's a number of very simple strategies that you can do to try and create these environments: facilitating parent networks so that parents have support, encouraging reflection and learning, simply communicating with parents using all of those great strategies that Nikki shared, taking time to understand what's going for parents, and really importantly, providing opportunities to raise issues, for parents to raise issues and to be heard, not just to raise them and ignore them. All of these things which create an environment which welcome and value parents will allow you as a coach to work with them, and more importantly, potentially allow parents to be involved in a way that leads to the most positive outcomes for their children. So I'll conclude there by just stating that, you know, we understand, and hopefully through this very brief presentation, you've got a feeling that actually it's really difficult and challenging for parents at times, and it's very complicated. And as a coach or as a researcher working in this area, it's not as simple as just telling parents to do these things or to avoid these things, but instead we need to take a broader lens and understand that actually there is no roadmap to being successful within sport or being a successful sport parent. And as a coach, if you can create an environment which facilitates positive involvement from parents, then we're all at least moving in the same direction. And so that's everything from me. And I'm really looking forward to having some discussion here and a chance to answer some questions.
Wow, thank you so much, Camilla and Nikki, for those two very interesting presentations, really on a topic that I'm extremely passionate about, both as a coach, as an academic, but more so as a parent as well, really being at both ends, really, sometimes being the coach that is coaching other people's kids, but sometimes giving my kids to someone else to be coached by. So that's a fantastic topic, really. So thank you very much for your presentation. I'm going to start with a very informal question and very non-academic question. Given that you've both recently become parents for the first time, has that had an influence at all on your thinking around the topic? And I'll tell you why, because when I became a parent first time 15 years ago, it really changed me as a coach. I don't know, any reflections on your becoming a parent in the last 2 years?
I'll jump in if you want there, Nikki. I'd say that the thing for me is it's reaffirmed my commitment to trying to appreciate the parents' perspective and just how challenging it is. But it's also made me realize, you know, why parents advocate for their children so much. And I've started to gain a much clearer understanding of maybe why parents do ask the questions they do, or why they appear to be pushy. You know, I think about dropping my son off at nursery in the mornings, and I know him the best, and I'm with him all of the time. And I hand him over to someone who will see him for an extended period of the day, but doesn't know him like I do. And I want to make sure I've told them all of the right things. And at the end of the day, I want to know all of these different things. And, you know, sometimes I do have to bite my tongue and think, oh, actually, I can't ask all of these things, and which are the appropriate things to be asking. But that sense of, you know, I know this child like no one else does. And I think definitely when they've not long been back at, off maternity leave is been a very, very big eye opener for me, just how powerful that emotional bond really is. Nikki, I don't know if you've had a similar, please tell me you've had a similar.
Absolutely. yeah, that sounds very, very familiar, Camilla. And I think it's brought home to me the importance of, as a parent, finding a sporting environment that aligns with your beliefs and your approach to parenting more widely, which is the reason why when my son first joined a gymnastics club, I don't take him because I don't want to be that parent looking at all of the coaching behaviours with a microscope and wondering why they're using particular pedagogical strategies. But I know he goes, I know the quality of coaching is good, I know he has a good time. So I'm looking forward to when I can be more involved and hopefully be more comfortable. But yeah, I think that's the thing I've taken away from it is trying to find somewhere that is aligned.
And I'm glad you made those points, really, because that was my experience as well. I realized, oh wow, this is what these people have been feeling like for the last 10 years, and I never realized how powerful this feeling is, really, when I was coaching their kids until I had my own, really. And that really made me I don't know, maybe the word is respect parents a lot more, in the sense of what it means to be a parent, and therefore why you ask certain questions, why you can sometimes come across as someone tedious that you really would like not to talk to and just make your way down the car park and go home. But their children matter to them a lot, and rightly so. So really changed.
And compassion for anyone sleep deprived.
Absolutely. and I was going to make another observation, really, and see what your take is, both for you, really. And I'm conscious of time, really, because we're getting close to 2 o'clock, and I know you guys have to go. But one of the things that I've noticed, really, over the years, really, and I've been lucky enough that at times stay with a group of players for 3-4 years. So you see them from 12 to 16. And as the child changes dramatically over those 4 years, their own relationship with their parents change and what they need from them. What's your experience of how that impacts on the parents, on the parent-coach relationship, on the parent-coach-athlete relationship as children grow into the teenage years?
My main reflection here is just how tough that time is for parents. When we do workshops with parents, or when we've put programs of support in for parents, one of the main things they ask us is how do I talk to a teenager? And I think we direct them to different places, but I think sometimes it's hard because as a parent, you suddenly don't have that closeness maybe in the same way with your child as you did. Your child's change and they don't talk to you. You're not the number one in their life in terms of who they're going to share information with. And at the same time, they're often spending more time with the coaches and developing stronger relationships with them. So it's possibly one of the first places where, as a parent, you would witness your child developing a strong relationship with another adult, because we're not in schools, right? We don't necessarily see those sort of relationships. So I think, the research would point to that being a challenging time in the parent-coach relationship. And I would definitely say that, I can understand that, especially from a parent's perspective, just how tough they find it having that change in relationship with their child during that period.
And I think, to build on that, Camilla, in certain sports, you might not have the opportunity to work with the same coach for that period of time. So potentially in, say, football, for example, you may have seen 2 or 3 or even 4 different coaches within that time. And at the beginning of every season, it's almost like starting again. Whereas you and I remember one parent saying to me, like, we've been in this together from the start. My son's coach at the moment has been with him for 3 months. So that kind of transition for a parent, especially around times where there may be selection happening, transitions into junior to senior sport, possibly, sustaining an injury with, bodies growing and those kind of things, can mean that there's just some more kind of hurdles and different experiences that it's not just the child and the child's coach experiencing them, but the parent is experiencing them too.
And that's a really good point, Nikki. And I think thinking about all those strategies that you talked about too, you might have developed trust and you might have got great communication with a coach, and then the next season that person changes and you've got to start all over again with a coach who maybe has different expectations or different, it's quite arbitrary sometimes. At under 13 we're developmental, at under 14 we focus more on winning or whatever. And as a parent, you've got to suddenly adjust to a change that's maybe not all that well communicated. So no, I think that change is a really good point.
And I think neither of us talked about this in a lot of detail, but there are some organisations that run kind of more formal parent education kind of sessions or programs even that are based around trying to prepare parents for what might be to come, what things they can do to help to try and reinforce that you're probably doing the right kind of things to help your child in this sport as well. And that is another strategy that parents in some sports have said that they actually want as well. They'd like some more sort of formal support to help to understand the journey and what's coming.
And that's interesting really, because in 2 weeks time, I think on the next webinar, we've got 2 people that are doing that a lot, that are going into environments to run sessions with parents really and really support that parental development or parental. I mean, when you were saying that, Nikki, and I think Camilla, you mentioned it. For me, something really important that I've seen really through my own coaching experience is the idea of the networks, creating those parent networks where they both realize that they're not the only ones feeling like that. But also then can learn from each other. And what do you do when he does that, when he says that, or what do you do when she comes home all sad because she didn't play that much or she had a terrible game? And I think those networks are super important, that support mechanism.
Yeah, that would be one of my main recommendations for organizations. If you don't have some sort of networks, and they don't have to be formalized, but those sort of social opportunities for parents to talk to other parents. In some place I've been, there's been kind of a parent mentoring program, not formally called that, but where you can talk to the parents of the older children and get a feel for what's to come. And then also you can do just basic logistics, like, can you share lifts? Can you actually, I need a night off, or I need to work late, and actually take away some of those logistical demands, through those networks. But, I say to my PhD students, no one else knows what doing a PhD with me is like, other than each other. And it's the same as a parent, only other parents working with that same coach know the experience that you're going through, really. And so, I think those networks of having an opportunity to get to know the parents who are in the exact same type of situation as you is really, really beneficial.
Gary, I believe you had 1 or 2 questions of your own.
Yeah, just one from me, briefly, if that's okay. I'm absolutely fascinated by it. I'm not a parent yet, hopefully one day, but I've spent a lot of time in talent development programs where I've worked with a lot of young coaches in those situations as well, where they're like, I need to be mindful of the parents watching. This looks a little bit messy, as some of the anecdotes that you both said. I wonder, what value would you see if you gave the parent a tracksuit? Because that's such an important part of the coach's identity. I mean, I'm wearing an I Coach Kids badge today, and Nikki's wearing a Leeds Beckett one. That badge is such an important part of the coach's identity. I wonder what your thoughts are if the parent also donned that badge or that tracksuit.
I'll go. I think it is really important for parents to feel part of the club or the organisation in which you're coaching, and whichever ways can work to facilitate that, to make it feel a welcoming environment, to make it feel that you're respected and heard as a parent, is really important. I think you'd get mixed reactions about sharing kit with parents from other coaches primarily. But I certainly think having an opportunity to try and make parents feel part of the family is important.
Yeah, and I would say I think it's important to keep the distinction. So definitely part of the family, welcomed, respected, valued. But you are there as a parent, and I think, you know, we haven't got into the messy world of parent coaches, and that is a really tough one. I'm sure Sergio has his own experiences to share there. You know, that's a tough one for parents to navigate. So I think, for me, I think, you know, one of the easiest ways, you know, I do hear that often from coaches, you know, I don't want parents to watch, like they don't understand what I'm doing, or it's really messy. I coach tennis. We played a game where you had to hit the ball against the ceiling and the walls, and you could see parents going like, what are they doing? But as soon as you explain to parents and say, this is great for developing these sort of skills and reacting in different situations, then they get it. So Nikki talked around that kind of that lap, as a coach taking a lap, and my students laugh because I talk about this all the time. I'm a really big fan of whiteboards. If you don't have time to walk around and tell parents what you're doing, jot it down on a whiteboard, like, today the focus is this, in these sorts of drills we're working on this and this. Then parents know what you're doing. They can talk to their child at the end exactly about what they were doing and what did you think of this drill. So you're all on the same page, and parents feel part of it. And as a coach, hopefully then you don't have to worry that it looks messy, because it's clear why it looks messy or why the drill is in this way. So I think for a long time, the result of being worried about parents watching has been to say, don't have parents watch. But actually, if you're worried about parents watching and you tell them not to watch, then they're just going to quiz their children a lot to try and work out what they did. Whereas if you embrace parents and help them understand what you're doing, then they can reinforce what you're doing, which will have all sorts of benefits in terms of learning. Sorry, that had nothing to do with tracksuits, Gary. But
no, it's fine, because I guess the tracksuit can be a metaphor as well, right? It can be about that being part of that family, feeling like that you're all in the same house trying to work towards a shared goal, whatever that might be. So yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, it might not be a tracksuit, but in my context, because I love the way Nikki put it, that you really need to be aware of your context. Okay. In my context, which is not a professional football academy, it's a basketball academy, but because of the status of basketball in this country, is not at the level of professionalism that it might be in other countries. For us, it makes sense to engage parents in the sense that we need them to do some jobs for us. Okay, so we don't give them a tracksuit, but we might say, well, are you any good doing the statistics, doing games? Can we teach you to use a statistics package? Do you want to do that? Are you? Can you do the table for us? Can you do the coffee shop? Okay, the talk shop. And I think those things really work really well for those parents that they really want to contribute something because they feel it's their duty to the club. They just don't want to take out of the club. They want to also put in. But also for some of those that might be a little bit, let's say, over engaged, let's give them something productive to engage with sometimes, if they want to. And I think that's always worked a quick treat for us, really. I was going to finish just with one thing really that you both said that really spoke to me a lot, is that I think the idea of trust and communication is very strong, in the sense of we need to understand that parents always have the best intentions at heart. Hopefully get the parents to understand that we also have the best intentions, that we both make mistakes, and that if we can talk and appreciate and forgive each other's mistakes, and just have open conversations, that makes life a lot easier for everybody, and particularly for the child. But it is a tough place to get to, where you are able to stand in front of a parent or a group of parents and say, you know what, today I got it wrong, and that was my fault, whether that was in training or a game or whatever. But they really value that so much, and it opens a massive door for them to see you as a human being as well, not just as a coach. So anyway, I'm gonna wrap it up there. Thanks a million, Nikki and Camilla. Fantastic, really, to have you on the let's call it on the show, okay? And really looking forward to continuing the relationship with you two. I Coach Kids. We're going to have another webinar on parents in sport in a couple of weeks. It just makes for a fantastic month of parenting sport, really. So, Gary, back to you to wrap up.
Yeah, so thanks everybody again for the contributions today and the insights that you've shared. As Sergio's mentioned, in 2 weeks' time, so the 18th of June, we'll be running a webinar on working with parents in sport. So be sure to keep an eye out on all of our social media channels for the promo and the links to register for that event. But in the meantime, stay safe and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.